What is up, guys? Welcome back to the ECS cluster series where we are looking at deploying an ECS cluster that's ready for production. Thank you so much for hanging in there. We've done quite a lot in terms of getting our environment set up, setting up the VPC, and all of that good stuff. So in this particular video, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the ECS cluster module itself. And once we're done with that, in the next video, we'll bring both this ECS module and the VPC module into the main.tf file. And upon doing that, we'll then look at initializing our environment so that we're able to deploy these into AWS. So let's get started, right? So what I'm going to do is, as per normal, we have the main.tf, the output, and the variables file. Let me just close the files we were working with in the previous video here. And as normal, I'll start off with my variables, and then we'll work on the main. Let me drag the variables to the side. Okay, cool. And then let me just expand the view here. All right, so we'll start off with variables here. We'll have a variable called cluster name. We have a type of string. Cool. And then we're gonna have another variable here, and that's gonna be called container insights, and that's going to be a boolean. And I'm gonna describe what each of these. I'm gonna explain what each of these is actually gonna be doing in terms of configuration. And then the last one we're gonna have is repository settings. Right. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna make this one a type of object, and we're gonna have image tag underscore mutability. It's gonna be of type string. I want to say force delete. That'll be a boolean, and then image scanning configuration, which will also be a boolean. Cool. Fantastic. We're done with our variables. Now, for the ECS cluster itself, there's four things we're going to focus on. There's the cluster itself, and then there's CloudWatch logs that we need to think about. There's a KMS key that we need to think about, resource, and this will be used for encryption. And then there is a capacity provider that we need to think about. And then lastly, when we deploy this, one thing we want to do as well is to deploy provision a ECR repository, which will essentially be for Docker images. Right, so let's start off with the cluster. We're going to say resource AWS ECS cluster, and since this is a module, say this, and then we'll give it a name. I'll say name equals var.cluster name, and then we're going to have settings, and these are settings now for the cluster. And what we do is we'll say container insights, okay, and then value var.enable. Right, what we're saying here is that if enable container insights variable is set to true, what we want to do is we then want to say enabled. We want container insights enabled, else we want them disabled, right? Basically, container insights is us allowing metrics for our cluster to be stored in CloudWatch, where we can then go and have a look for observability purposes. And then in the next block that we'll set up is configuration, and then what we'll set up there is execute command configuration, and then we'll have KMS ID, which will come from AWS KMS underscore KMS dot this dot AR. Now this resource we haven't really created yet, but in fact, let me rather do that now. All right. So resource AWS KMS, KMS key. We'll call it this, and essentially, and what we want to do there is just set up only the deletion window of 30 days. And what this will do is that it'll create a KMS key for us, which we'll then be able to use here. Sorry, I just made a correct reference here, which will then be able to be used to encrypt our log group, essentially, and we'll create that log group just now. So, and then in terms of logging, we'll say override. Okay, now, what is our log configuration, right? So CloudWatch encryption enabled. We want things to be encrypted, and that key will be used for that encryption. And then we want the log group name. Now we haven't created the log groups yet, and that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to say resource AWS CloudWatch underscore log group. That's what we're going to do here. And then we'll say this. And how we'll name this is by saying ECS slash the name of the cluster, right? And that's where the logs will be sent to. And then behind the scenes, ECS is going to have the necessary permissions to then write to that log group. And then here we'll say then we want the name of that log group. Okay, so now we're done with the cluster itself. That's all we need. We've set up the container insights, and we've set up the logging and how those logs will be encrypted. We've set up the log group itself and the KMS key. The next thing to set up now is the capacity provider. And what the capacity provider is this is what will essentially, this will be the compute layer that the cluster uses to run workloads. Remember, you have two options. You can either use Fargate or you can use ECS. You can use Fargate or EC2. Okay, I'm also going to name this and the cluster name, as you've guessed, what we'll do is we can say var.cluster name. But another option is we could have said AWS ECS cluster dot name. We could have done not this dot name. We could have done that, but and it will extract the name from the resource, but we don't have to do that. And then what we want to do as our capacity provider, we want to use Fargate, right? So this cluster that we're building is going to have it's going to have just one option, which is Fargate. Maybe later on would make it better and add an option to say you want EC2, but there's a lot of configuration we didn't have to do in relation to that, right? And basically our provider strategy will be a base of 1, weight 100, and a capacity of 100. Okay. The next thing we're then going to create for our ECS module is the AWS ECR repository. Yeah, this is where Docker images will be stored or pushed to. So in terms of its name, we're going to say whatever the cluster name is, dash ECR dash repository. Okay, boom. And then in terms of image immutability, okay, that will be done via the variable. Where's my variable now? var.ecr repository settings. Okay, cool. Will be done via that, and then in there we want image tag immutability, and then for force delete, right, we want this. That also will depend on the ECR container. It's not container insights, man. ECR. Why is this variable not showing? I don't know why. Okay, cool. But in there we want the force delete option. Okay, and then what we then want is image scanning configuration. So image scanning configuration, how do we want to handle that? So do we want to scan these images and push? That too will depend on the settings here. So if it's true, then definitely that's what's going to happen. But if it's not, then it'll be false. Then the tags will be quite simple. Tags, which will be name var.cluster name dash ECR. That's all we'll do then. Cool. I think what I'm going to do as well is while we're here, I'm also going to do outputs. So if you say outputs, we want to output the cluster name, and this will be important for when we work on services. So I'm going to say AWS ECR CS cluster dot this dot name, right? And then the next thing we'll output, I'm not sure why, but we'll do the cluster ID as well. And the value there will be again AWS ECS underscore cluster.this.id. Perfect. And that's it. So we're done with the ECS module here. So now the task is then to bring, let me just close all of these. I think I didn't say this one. So now what's next is to then bring both modules here. So we'll bring the VPC module here, and then we'll bring in the ECS module here, right? And yeah, and then we should be able to deploy that. So that's what's going to be happening in the next video. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time and attention, and yeah, hope you're finding value in this video so far. Leave some comments in the comment section to let me know if you are having any questions on anything, and I'll get into detail, especially with the Terraform aspect of things where I'm not really getting into detail. You'll also notice that I'm not going into the documentation for us to look at certain things, because that would make things longer. But if you do have any questions, just let me know in the comment section and I'll get to those. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.